Hi. Today we're going to talk about examining leases as part of a buyer's due diligence in a real estate transaction. We're going to actually break it up into two parts. The first part's going to be in residential transactions, and then we'll do a later talk on commercial transactions. If you're buying a property, sometimes your intended uses are differ. Sometimes it's for your own personal use, sometimes it's a second home, sometimes it's an investment property. When markets are as hot as they've been recently, oftentimes properties go up for sale prior to their sellers really intending that they'll sell because of market conditions. And one of the biggest results of that is properties are oftentimes sold with a tenant in the property. Now, if you're a buyer, you absolutely need to know that the property is going to have a tenant in it after closing. And in fact, the standard FAR bar or contract that we use has on page 2 a very prominent box. It's paragraph 6B that must be checked if a tenant is going to stay on after closing. If you're a buyer, you should have already known that this was the case when you negotiated for the purchase of the property. If, however, you didn't, you're being told on that page 2 box that a tenant's going to be there after closing. If that's the case, this is your opportunity to negotiate potential security deposit for the seller, not the tenant, to leave behind at closing to ensure that the tenant timely leaves as their lease provides for and does so without damage. So if you're a buyer, the first thing you need to do is review that lease. That provision of the contract provides for you to get a copy of the lease. You need to get a copy of the lease. You need to see the term left on it, the security deposit, the repair obligations, and like I said, you may want to negotiate with your seller for your seller to leave some money in escrow until that tenant leaves. It's then your obligation to get a tenant estoppel letter. Now, we've spoken at length in previous talks about the tenant estoppel letter, but again, that's you as the buyer getting a letter that's certified from the tenant, stopping them from later arguing that they have a different amount of rent or advance rent or security deposit or term, expiration date. So if you're a buyer buying residential property that will have a tenant stay on after closing, all of these things are very important and need to be part of your due diligence. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.